And I'd like to just begin with asking Lori to address what showed up on 3 or 4 or 5 different cards. A question about sociopaths, psychopaths, narcissists. Are they born? Can they be helped? Etc. So Lori, would you begin with that?
That is a really fundamental question with this issue. Are they born this way, or is it developmental? Is it the environment that affects them? Or as I'd mentioned, it can rub off. It's in certain ways, in some cases, the behaviors are somewhat contagious. For the people who truly are psychopaths, sociopaths, and narcissists, there is enough evidence now, there's one of the books back there that is fully dedicated to the biological differences between the personality disorders and a normal brain. And there are differences in the structures in the prefrontal cortex, which are significantly reduced in their volume and the number of neurons and neuronal connections. There are changes in other portions of the brain, including the connections of the prefrontal cortex into the limbic system. There are also differences in the size of the amygdala, so that it turns out, and in sensory and perceptual issues. There's a study of what facial expressions do psychopaths recognize, and they could recognize most of the emotions in other people. They could not recognize fear. And one psychopath reported, he says, I don't know what that expression is, but I see it just before I kill someone. That is not someone who has just been traumatized. Trauma can affect it, I think more so with narcissists. Trauma does not seem to affect psychopaths the same as it does normal people, because the emotional centers are not hooked up the same. So we're looking at real differences. Can they be helped? That is an important question. The first criteria for being helped is that you have to be willing to change. You have to be wanting help. And the least likely person to be found in a therapeutic setting is a psychopath or a sociopath. And the next least likely would be a narcissist. So if you want to help them, probably your best bet is to be absolutely straightforward with them and do not bite. Do not bite what they dangle. Give them honest feedback and watch what happens. If you try to love them into help, you're going to go down. It is a bottomless pit. I could not say that too strongly, because that is how they make their energetic living, by having people sacrifice themselves to them in trying to help them. In fact, one psychopath said, when he was asked what he wants most in life, his answer was not women, wealth, housing, all the things we think of in our culture as what you'd want. He said, all I want is pity. If I have your pity, I can have anything.
Well, maybe, Marc, you can carry on with that, although that's really something to digest, in terms of the role of media. And what does a person do when they're being attacked by a psychopath, when they're being smeared on the media? What do you suggest we do? How do we react to that? Because it does happen to people, even people like us who aren't famous.
You know, I'm not sure entirely how to answer that. But if you, I'm not entirely sure how to answer that because I don't have that kind of background that Lori does. But if you look at something as simple and as dramatic as the presidential debates, and you look at them over the last 3 or 4 different presidential debates, and you look at the difference between the way the Republicans stay on point and the way the Democrats don't, I'm not taking sides here, I'm just sort of doing an objective analysis, you realize that the Republican contenders always stay 1, 2, or 3 things, irrespective of what the question is. They don't care about the question. They only care about getting their message across, and they're consistent and persistent in getting that message across. And so if you just purely look at this from a standpoint of how the brain works, right, it works on repetition. And if you have a position of authority and a position of power, and a global or a national stage at least, and you're able to get that message across consistently, that's what you do. The flip side is you have people that are all over the map. And Daniel talked about this in terms of the Democratic Party and how they've now become right of center, trying to adopt what they have, trying to stay with the times and stay alive, basically. It's a fear-based situation. So they lose all the debates for that very reason. And because they don't have a galvanizing force to get people emotionally engaged and to gain that collective support from the audience, right? And the psychological support, and more importantly, the energetic support. It's almost like they're energetic vampires.
Invite the two of you to respond to that rather than me just posing another question, because these are taking us further down in a particular direction. If you'd like to comment, either of you.
Well, I would say that, again, it's one of the mistakes that history is making in the country is trying to suggest that, for example, that it was Hitler's personal psychology that was the big deal, and that he was psychopathic and may have had syphilis, that he was crazy because he didn't get accepted at the art school, all that stuff. It completely ignoring the fact that, to state it bluntly, Brown Brothers Harriman set up a bank called the Union Bank of New York that financed the entire construction of the major headquarters for the Third Reich. And people don't even know it. I mean, there are structural, systematic things that go off on a tangent of analyzing the individual psychology of a particular person. It's one thing when you're counseling, women who are abused by their husband and something like that. But when you're talking about people that have got 63 million people voting for them, and being nominated by one of the two major political parties to be their standard bearer and stuff like that, it's there's an ethos and a set of values that they're after there. And the same thing was true of Hitler. Is that he would not have survived without the funding of the Union Bank of New York, their subsidiary up in the Netherlands. It was called the Bank of Shipping and Commerce that actually gave the money to them. But this is a whole structural thing, and that's the reason you go to school, is to learn how to do critical thinking and to see the deeper patterns of things. And these symptoms of a rising authoritarian state. In their selection of people like having like Jim Johnson, the guy that is in the debates, just raging and screaming and foaming at the mouth and stuff like that, and Trump saying things like, if they quote, if the Democrats impeach me, there's going to be rioting in the streets. I can guarantee it. And remember, I've got the army and the police and the bikers on my side, and they're armed. And he said, and if you upset them, they can be very, very angry. And to say that on national television and stuff, is that it's not just that he's a sociopath, which I'm sure he is, but the fact that one of the two major political parties find that putting him into a position of power helps their interests. But I do want to say parenthetically that I believe that the National Republican Party planned to have Jeb Bush be the nominee. That was their plan. But what they did is, because they were so convinced that Hillary Clinton was going to be the nominee for the Democratic Party, that it was a slam dunk, that what they wanted to do is accelerate their selection process. So what they did is they changed their rules in the primaries, and they had it so that whoever won the most votes would get all of the delegates. And there were 13 candidates in the Republican primary in 2016. So he would get 18% of the vote. Someone else would get 13%, one would get 12%, one would get 10%, but he got all the delegates.
Right.
And so what happened is, because of that mistake that was made on the part of the Republican National Committee, they ended up getting this guy. And as long as he would agree to cut the tax rates for the richest 1%, cut the tax rates for the corporations, eliminate the estate tax, and appoint reactionary judges from the Federalist Society, he's okay. Whatever else he says and however crazy he is. And then what he did, much like what happened with Hitler actually got, because of his sociopathology, got into pushing it way farther than they may have even imagined. And that's the danger.
Right.
That's the danger of him personally.
I just wanted to add that psychopathy can end up being structural. So when we understand what psychopathy and sociopathy and narcissism is at an individual level, then we can translate it and understand. Because as an example is gangs. There are many, usually the leader in a gang or in the mafia actually has the personality disorder, but they set up an environment that will induce the behavior in other people. And those people, if they're separated and get other input, and this is part of the answer too to can they be helped, it depends. Those people can get out of that influence and actually become advocates for healing. They can go back to their neighborhoods and help other kids who have been pulled into gangs. So part of it is distinguishing who actually is the sociopath or psychopath and who has been influenced, who is it rubbed off on. But they can become an entirely structural thing, which I think is a lot of what you've been describing.
So,
Can I?
Jennifer.
What Lori just said reminds me of a question that I have for everyone here, maybe for the audience too. So, a few days ago, a first-year student at Barnard was brutally murdered. I don't know if anybody is aware that this happened, but she was walking through Morningside Park, and 18 years old, wanted to be a journalist. Her dad is a professor at James Madison University, Madison. And now they're saying, so we don't know who did it. We know that she managed to pull herself up the stairs and collapsed in front of a guard's office, and then she died. But they're saying that it was 1 to 3 people, and the suspects that they have are between 13 and 16 years old. And, and this is an 18-year-old, and the first newspaper article said armed robbery, which I don't think that people arm robber an 18-year-old college student. I don't think that was what was happening. So my question is, when you said that psychopathy can become kind of part of the culture, how do we confront something this horrible with people who might be that young? Is that a result of our culture? Can history help us understand it? Or do we just have to say that this is evil? How do we make sense of those kinds of things that are unspeakable tragedies that are happening today?
That there's more than one question
A
in
lot
that.
of questions, yeah.
And so one is, yes, when children are affected this way, including the children in Africa who have been pulled into unspeakable acts as children, there are changes because that's woven into the development of the brain and the development of the emotional system. So that is particularly tragic, not only for the victims, but for the children who have been placed in that situation. If they are truly psychopaths, that behavior shows up very young, very, very young. At 2 years old, you can start to see some of this. I'm working with someone whose child is, and it's very difficult. We're trying to shape this child in a direction to at least learn enough skills and viewing it as truly as a handicap. So for children, again, when you try to help them, you will find out if that person truly is, or whether they get another taste of something else, have a longing for love and connection and normal bonding in a human, they will tend to respond to it. So if you're trying to help someone and you speak truth to them, and sometimes when it's a systemic issue like that, then you need authorities. You need authorities who are educated, who know what's going on, and don't come in with just slam them, but sort them out. And the ones who truly are, who are structurally personality disordered, then containment is what's needed, or a setting where they can, it's understood what is being worked with. For the ones who are not, then you have a chance. And it's intelligently sorting them that's really crucial there.
There's also another part of that. And one of the first questions I asked of the audience when I was talking was how many people are digital natives? And the reason that that's important is because if you look at the young people who have been brought up only with computers and only with cell phones and only with video games in particular, and you have an onslaught of news that happens on a daily basis that basically with all of these tragedies are happening all around us, whether they're individual tragedies like this young woman at Barnard or they're collective tragedies of genocide around the world or even genocide of the planet, people get immune. They get numbed down to it, and the neuroreceptors start shutting down.
Yeah.
And when the neuroreceptors shut down, you can't get to them because they've lost their quality for empathy and they've lost the quality for compassion. And within the digital world, it's very difficult because I'm not a video game player, but I have two business partners who both are. And one of the key precepts of those video games is twofold. One is that they can become any avatar that they want within that game, right? And more importantly, they can get killed in that game, shut the game down, start up a new game, recreate their life. Right. So the idea of there being mortality, the idea of being repercussions and consequences to actions, it like evaporates at a certain level. And my question actually that I wanted to ask Laurie is, I'm just wondering if that's literally altering brainwave connectivity, right? It's altering synaptic connectivity. If that in some way can be passed down genetically to children, right? So there's an epigenetic issue that's going on here because
that's a yes on that.
Yeah, because you're raising an entire culture. I mean,
Yes.
right? And if you look at it slightly differently, we didn't talk about artificial intelligence, right? But the issues of artificial intelligence are extraordinary in terms of the impact that it's having on us right now. But we've just begun to scratch the surface on artificial emotional intelligence, right? And most of the time that you're talking to a customer service person, you're talking to a machine, and you don't know that,
Right.
right? It's gotten so sophisticated. So you have the whole generation, two generations that now don't have a real sense, a real clear boundary between reality and media, and reality and consequences.
So Danny, you used a very interesting term in your presentation referring to the puppeteers behind the scenes, full spectrum dominance. What a term. I'm just curious to ask you, in light of this thread, about the people you've met who are in these positions, who've been trained into that, in-trained and born, and are they like completely different creatures? Is there hope for them? Is there redemption possible? How do those folks get to be where they are? I mean,
Well, if you have a culture that is an economic theory of development and distribution of resources, which is the maximization of your own personal wealth and greed. You know, there have been encyclicals written on this. In the bishops' conferences have commented on the fundamental flaw at the root of the transnational corporate capitalist economic model, which in which you train people to think greed is good, and self-interest is to be pursued in this incredibly selfish, aggressive way. Then people, even young people that come into seeing that endorsed by the culture, start to numb themselves down. And when you have also an economy where huge percentages of the young people, especially black and brown and poor people, don't have any access to higher education, terrible schools, and go into the military, where they actually train them to kill. I mean, I spent 2 years in special forces training and walked out finally when they were telling me that when you parachute in, they have these halo jumps, these high altitude, low opening chutes, and if you drop in behind the lines, they were talking about Vietnam at the time, if anybody sees you land, women or children, you have to kill them and bury them with your chute. And just that's the way it is. And to train you with the authority of the government training you, especially when there was a draft to bring you in and try to dumb you down and deaden your natural human instincts for care and affection for others. This is a structural thing. And what I'm trying to suggest is that we have to have a higher kind of structural analysis of the culture that we're in. It's like being born in Rome. And then thinking that, going and laying waste to the the exterior territories outside your boundaries is okay. That you're going and killing them off and killing their kids and taking them as slaves and stuff. And if you're raised in thinking that's the right way to do it, and worse yet, if both major political parties support it, you don't have any kind of exterior reference except for potentially churches and synagogues and religious and spiritual communities. And the problem is they aren't doing that well. It really because they institutionally get bought off, and the Catholic Church is going through that huge thing right now, trying to deal with the thing with the Jesuit order. The largest single order in the Catholic Church is since Pedro Rupe became the Superior General back in 1962, was actually trying to change the entire culture of the church to support poor people. And you can see representations of it now with the Jesuits and the Marian sisters getting killed in Latin America because they're working with poor people and trying to do that. So that there are structural changes that need to be made in the country. And that we have to keep focused on that. And that's in a certain sense the difference between Bernie Sanders and Liz Warren, for example, and Joe Biden. Joe Biden isn't going to threaten to change any of the basic structures. He thinks we just need to get back to normal, which sounds a lot like Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan one time said, "What's all this talk about a black problem? I remember when there wasn't any black problem."
Okay. I want to shift the focus here because there have been so many questions about health, and a lot of this can kind of render us feeling powerless. What can we do about these big issues? Health is something maybe, Jennifer, you could address in terms of the mind-body connection, autoimmune diseases, toxic environment. We've spoken a lot about psychological factors and then big physical factors, but what about the personal physical factors like the food we eat, the choices we make? Could you address that for a few minutes?
Sure. do you have about 5 hours? You want sort of the practical, like, let's get down to every day, what does it look like in your refrigerator? I think we should go there. Should we go there? So here are some of the things that you need to do. You need to get naked and make love. Because you do. It's good for you at any age. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be goal-oriented. You heard it from me. So I'm not saying you have to have, actually men should try to have many orgasms because it's good for your prostate. There are some doctors that will tell men if they have prostate problems not to, but actually they're wrong. And we need to clear things out, and just humans thrive on touching. So the wonderful exercises that Marc had us do, like we need to be hugging each other and being affectionate and that kind of thing. Something else you need to do, I'm telling you to take your clothes off, is to ground yourself in nature. So the Japanese, you probably all know this, have this wonderful concept of forest bathing, where you just get out in nature. And this is really hard in the 21st century, but when you do it, leave your cell phone off. Don't use it and take pictures, and don't use it and talk on the phone with a friend, even though that's what you want to do, because we all are dealing with addiction, and we're dealing with a lot of behavioral addictions, including addiction to our phones. And the other thing is getting into the dirt. So we know when we touch dirt, like Liz, who's in the audience here, planted like 150 trees on her property because she's amazing, and you should all support her incredible business, which is called Organic and Healthy. But getting out there and digging in the dirt and getting your hands dirty with non-toxic soil. And then the other thing I'll say, I lost Will's attention, so I'm talking too long. Sorry, Will. But I mean, another really important thing that I think you probably do and try to do, but it's so hard, is to reduce your exposure to toxins. So everywhere that means thinking about the food that you're eating and spending the extra money to buy organic, but even better, buying directly from farmers at farmers markets, or growing food in your own garden. Eating the less processed food you eat, the less toxic it's going to be, and the more you can limit your exposure to plastic and endocrine disruptors. So that means also in your beauty products, a lot of people don't realize this. I've seen the most wonderfully progressive people use the most disgusting toothpaste, and we grew up on Crest and and it's the cradle to the grave, and that's what they want, is they want to hook you on a product from the cradle and you use it to the grave. And unfortunately, unfortunately, a lot of these products are going to send you to an early grave. So even look at the ingredients in your toothpaste.
Thank you, Jennifer. Well, we need to be out of this room in about 10 minutes. But the good news is that we're going to move over to the Luna Cafe area. If anyone would like to join us and just mingle. I apologize we haven't got to everybody's questions, but you may be able to pose them directly to the panelists. I'd like to just give you each 2 minutes here to complete.
20 more minutes, actually.
How many?
20 more.
What?
30 minutes.
Oh, yes, great.
Yes, got everybody's hopes up that they can leave now.
Don't you love it when that happens?
Stretching time, Will.
We are shifting time. All right, Marc, a number of questions have come in around the use of social media, net neutrality, and so forth. Could you kind of give us a snapshot from your altitude in a couple of minutes of what's going on? How can we use social media creatively, etc.? Not too big a question.
Well, you're talking to somebody who swore off Facebook about 18 months ago. It's an interesting question. I think that there are two things, right? Social media in general, I believe, feeds our herd instinct. I think it's very, very important. Feeds our herd instinct as human beings, right? Most people live unbelievably complicated and geographically disparate lives, and we're disconnected from our families and our friends and our community and the earth. And I think so. Social media has performed a really important function where you get to. We no longer are joined by groups. We're no longer bound by geography, right? We're bound by common interests and common values. So social media gives us an opportunity to transcend geographic boundaries and have that connectivity, right? But at the same time, it keeps us very disconnected from what's happening around us. So I'm really in favor, if you do want to be on social media, you put limits on it. You don't get sucked down the thread that goes down this thread and then that thread and then that thread. You give yourself the time that says, I'm going to be on social media for a particular amount of time, for a particular purpose, with a particular goal, and you set that and be disciplined about it. I think the most important thing is the discipline. I think there's a secondary aspect of this that's really, really vitally important, that if people don't recognize it now, they absolutely should. Al Gore referred to the internet as the digital superhighway, right? So imagine that you're driving down I-5 and every rest area you pull into is privately owned. It's owned by Arby's, or it's owned by Chick-fil-A, or it's owned by McDonald's, or it's owned by a media station, whatever. And the moment you get on that piece of property, everything you do on that piece of property is theirs. That's what happens when you're on the internet and you go into a social media site. If you ever read the terms and conditions of every site, you are in a private site, it's private property, and everything you do within that site is theirs and they own it, right? So that's one of the biggest issues that's happened on the net, and it's come out in the last few years. Everybody in Silicon Valley knows this. I alluded to that in my presentation. So if you want to change that, if you have to use a VPN, virtual private network, or you have to do private browsing or incognito browsing, depending upon what browser you use. If you use Google Chrome, which has an 86% market share globally, right? Know that Google Chrome is gathering data on all of you, right? That's the first thing. Secondly, you can do incognito browsing. If you're using Safari, which is the next biggest browser that you're using, you can do, I forgot the term, but if you go into the file menu, you can do that as well. All that means is that your browsing history is not kept in your browser cache. So everybody leaves a digital footprint everywhere you go, and it's kept in your browser cache. And that's why when you go in and you accept cookies, for example, on a website, you're allowing them to install a little piece of software on your machine that tracks you and everything that you're doing, right? So if you don't want to have that done, two things. Use a VPN, virtual private network. You can buy them. They cost anywhere from $10 a month to $60 a month, depending upon how robust they are. 2, do incognito browsing. 3, clear out your browser cache. Right? It's vitally, vitally important. Clear out your browser cache. Right? So what that means is that every time you have gone onto the web, if you've gone on every day for the last year, every single website that you've gone to is cataloged in your browser cache. And it's designed, quote unquote, for your convenience. So that when you go back to a particular site, they know you, They identify you, and you can see this. Hi, welcome back, Mark. Nice to see you again. Amazon does this. Hey, feels very friendly. It's not. It's nefarious. It's very covert, right? But it's presented, it's packaged in a way that makes it seem very innocuous. And hey, we're one big global family. Sorry, it doesn't work that way. The ideals of the internet, which I was fortunate to be part of in the early 90s, have completely been co-opted by corporate media and big corporations.
So I'm kind of basking in this feeling of having a lot of time. So I'm going to dare do something that was not done in some of the debates, bring up climate change, because we haven't really talked about that. And that's a tendency to not talk about climate change. So could we take a moment on that?
Oh, yeah.
I understand there's a question here, if you can hold for just a second.
Net neutrality there.
The last section, if you just ask social media and net neutrality, and a lot of people don't know what net neutrality is, I think it'd be really valuable for people to explain access to our information.
Can you do that briefly now?
Briefly. So let's go back to a really, really important supposition and foundation. Everything that we have, everything that we think is legislation that's passed by Congress, it's all created by corporations, every single last bit of it. And every single last bit of it, from health to telecommunications to media to everything, doesn't matter. Net neutrality is functionally the ability for people to have easy access, public access to the internet, not have it controlled or manipulated by your internet service provider, right? It used to be that there were very local and regional internet service providers. Now they're just big companies, right? And basically, the industry lobbied the FCC, which controls the internet, to basically say, no, we're going to abide by the laws, by the rules that big business wants us to abide by. And so what they're basically doing is they're limiting our ability to have access to the net. They're limiting our ability, they're throttling the download speeds depending upon the kinds of information that you search for. They're limiting certain sites, and companies are doing self-censoring. Facebook, as Jennifer talked about, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, they're doing this under the guise of being good corporate citizens, of basically censoring what we should have access to, right? But you got to remember, the internet is not a public utility. It's privately owned, right? It is not a public utility. It started out as a research effort under the Defense Authority, DARPA. I forgot the exact what it all means, but it was put, and it's now under the Department of Commerce. It's all business, right? So you got to recognize that it's not just what you see, but it's what you don't see, and more of what you don't. Whenever you read an article in any kind of news piece, and the same thing with the internet, you got to look at what they're not telling you. That's almost more important than what they're telling you. The level of discernment that you have to have is really important. So the issue of net neutrality, just to get back to that point, has been up for the last year and a half, and particularly under the FCC. And basically, the FCC sided with big business. And so there's still a fight going on at a very grassroots level, but frankly, it hasn't gotten very far. It's still pretty, hasn't really gotten far. Daniel, do you want to?
Does that answer the question you had there?
I guess in bringing it up, I was just hoping that we would encourage advocacy, because I think the more people know that we're being actively, censored to, and that some sites can get fast feeds, other sites can be corrupted and blocked altogether, or slow speeds, and in terms of what information we get to see or not, we as the public need to hold our representatives accountable. We deserve to pick what we see.
So what kind of advocacy can we take?
Well, there are a number of groups. I mean, EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation, has been on the forefront of this for 25 years, right? The Electronic Frontier Foundation. Frontier Foundation is just one group. There's a couple of other groups that are specifically dealing with net neutrality issues. I think the biggest challenge, frankly, is that the onslaught of junk that's happening around us, and we're being attacked on so many democracy and personal freedoms and sovereignty are being attacked on so many different levels that it's overwhelming, and we have to tune it out, and we get numb to it. So my suggestion would be is take one or two causes that you're really passionate about and focus on that, and really put your attention in those things where you can make a big difference. Go deep, not wide.
Yeah.
Right?
So I was remiss in not introducing this panel with the theme that it's been designated with, which is this is a solutions panel. So I'd like to just really refocus on that, because these are such big topics, and I think in the remaining time we have, it'd be very encouraging for everyone to know what can we do about these issues. So if I may, I'd like to return to the topic of climate change. Danny?
Yeah, one of the bottom line is the Green New Deal. That is the real solution to this thing. That our office, the Romero Institute, is actually drafting the California Green New Deal for the state legislature. That we have a 50-page outline of all 13 different sections of this. There's going to be like a 450-page bill that we've actually got a rough draft of. And the reason why it's so important is because the shift away from the fossil fuels is essential, not only, though very importantly, of course, to stop global climate change, but it's also the source of power of the entire secret government operation, the kind of power behind the scenes is the oil corporations and the major corporations that are involved in that. The entire U.S. military and other militaries run on fossil fuels, you know, with the exception of the atomic submarines and a couple of the aircraft carriers. You know, all the jet planes, all the fighter jets, all of the tanks, all of the armored personnel, all of it runs on oil. And so that they're locked into the fossil fuels as the source of their power, the petrodollar. But so that it's the major tactic to break the power of the oil corporations and the fossil fuel industry, and therefore the major geopolitical power that we're dealing with here. The effort to invade and occupy the Middle Eastern oil fields, the whole effort to get at Russian oil under the Crimea and Black Sea and the Arctic shelf that's behind all of this bizarre stuff that's going on now. With the reason that Carter Page was placed under surveillance is because he was meeting with the executive secretary of the CEO of Rosneft, which is the private oil corporation of Russia, and they were trying to negotiate this deal. Okay, and so the Green New Deal attacks right at the heart of that, under the rubric, legitimately, of stopping global climate change. And so that we have to have a deal with all of these different areas: transportation, the generation of electric power, water stuff, the waste materials, the way to finance the whole thing with state banks and all of that. There's a comprehensive way that this has got to be dealt with. We have succeeded in the state of California in getting the Central Committee of the Democratic State Party to put a plank in their platform to adopt the Green New Deal. We've tried to get the Republican Party to do it too. They aren't interested, but nobody's drafting it. So we're actually drafting the details of it, and we're following the principle that, as Greta Thunberg has said, is that as long as all you're talking about doing is doing what is presently politically feasible, rather than what is absolutely necessary to be done, there will be no hope for our generation. Okay, so what we're doing is using the criteria of what it is that absolutely has to get done, and to get done within the next 8 years, basically, of the 2 terms of the new president coming in, ideally. That, you know, what is it has, and we want to lead through California because we have supermajorities in both houses in California. We've got a governor that's in support of this, and so what we're doing is trying to lead out of California by showing that it can be done. But there are hard decisions that need to be made. For example, that, you know, by 2025, you ought not to be able to sell a fossil fuel engine car in the state of California any longer. Okay, period. And so therefore they have to bring in all the electric vehicles, all different car companies to sell them in California. And in another 5 years after that, you cannot drive a fossil fuel car in the state of California. And so we have to subsidize people being able to purchase electric cars through the taxing structure, and tax the major corporations that have generated the global climate change gases, to be able to subsidize people to buy the electric cars, and to put in a whole system of charging stations all throughout California. So these are some of the, and we have to put, to cap, not just cap and trade, but to prohibit the generation of global greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. It's totally nuts.
So hearing this and wanting to help,
Yeah.
what's our advocacy on an individual level?
What-
How do we support that?
What you need to do, very importantly, you need to communicate with your people on your county board of supervisors to find out what their local Green New Deal project is. You know, that they were mandated by state law to have a global climate change program. And some of them put it together and then just stuck it on the shelf. They haven't done a thing to enforce it. We did it down in Santa Cruz. We went and met with the city council. We got them to take it off the shelf. We got them, one of the things you want to do is compel your county board of supervisors to hire a person in charge of global climate change policy, and to figure out everything that can be done. For example, all of the new vehicles that are going to be purchased by the county, Santa Cruz County, have to be electric from this point on. Every new building that is built by the county or on county land has to be completely solar powered. We've now gone into establishing a community choice energy company. We have taken away all of the customers of Pacific Gas and Electric. They're all part of a community-owned energy company now in the county of Santa Cruz, Monterey, and San Benito. It's 100% non-global greenhouse gas generated electricity.
So are there details on this on your website?
Yes.
Is there guidance?
Yeah,
So
Romero
we're hearing
Institute.
that we can do something about this
Absolutely.
locally, right?
It's you go to romeroinstitute.org, and you'll find under it there's a thing called Green Power. And there's a whole Green Power project, and there's also a thing called the Green New Deal. And so that we're in the process now of having the 50-page outline vetted by major experts, using the criteria of what is absolutely necessary and what is technologically feasible within the next 8 years, not what's politically feasible. And then we have to either compel, and we need to do the education on the grassroots level to get everybody conscientized about this thing, so that they're not buffaloed by the fact that allegedly it's a big hoax. That we've got to get people mobilized and educated. So you need to have a grassroots education campaign. You need to have your community college start muscling up their courses for people to take. You need to get them to train people who are in the fossil fuel industry to get trained to work in the sustainable energy field. And there's all of that is in the bill.
So
Can I
ROMERO, the Romero Institute.
Yeah.
And it's Green Power and the Green New Deal.
I'd just like to add one thing. One of the things that's really vitally important about the electrical vehicles, both at the personal level and at the commercial level, is to recognize that you need to go out and use solar power,
Yes,
or wind
absolutely.
power, or some form of non-fossil fuels to gather that electricity.
Yeah.
Because if you're just putting a higher demand on fossil fuel generation
True,
or nuclear power, you're defeating the purpose. You have to look at in the tech world. There's something called total cost of ownership, which is really just life cycle accounting, and that's exactly what you need to do here.
Yeah.
Because it's not just the carbon footprint of buying an electric vehicle; it's the entire carbon footprint of the cost of running that automobile.
And building it.
And building
building
it.
it.
And
Right.
batteries especially.
And batteries, and batteries.
All that's in the
Right.
all that's in the bill.
So a question for those of you who know so much more about this than most of us. Do you have hope? I mean, there are those who have thrown up their hands and say,
Oh,
it's too late. For 50 years we've heard we were on the brink. We're still on the brink. Do you personally have hope relative to climate
Absolutely.
change, our ongoing
Absolutely.
survival?
No, absolutely. It's going to be very, very challenging. There's no doubt about it. But when we brought the Karen Silkwood case, nobody in the world thought that you could stop the construction of private nuclear power plants in the United States. There were billions and billions of dollars invested by the petroleum companies trying to buy the next generation of energy.
Yeah.
And so that we ended up with just 5 of us sitting in a room, started the whole thing to work on that, ended up stopping the construction of every single nuclear power plant in the entire United States.
That
You know,
deserves
so- but the same thing is true, that everybody's going, oh, I think the Contras, are getting weapons from the, well, get with it, will you? And so we went after them and stopped the smuggling of the weapons. And we went after them and exposed them. We got a special prosecutor appointed. They cut us off at the Gulch. by the whole Congress, both Republicans and Democrats joining together and saying, this is so complicated, we can't really understand what's happening. And so they all let them off the hook. And so that we ran right into the edges of power. The New York Times wouldn't publish the stuff. You couldn't get the Democrats to do anything about it, or the Republicans. And so what we did is organize people. We had 100 original called CAT teams, Christic Action Teams, all around the United States. And they wrote letters to the editor. They went out and stood on bridges and dropped signs over the thing. They went and sat in at the office of the local representatives. The fact is that this is not a spectator sport. This has got to be all of us actively working. This is a crisis. This is an absolutely serious crisis that we got to, and if with people doing that, then there's hope.
Do you remember that song, John Fogerty? Put me in, coach, I'm ready to play.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
I want to,
Can I just add one thing to this?
Yeah.
Because I want, this is now, what Daniel is talking about is vitally important, right? So I want to address how this relates to social media, because it's vital. It's really, really vital to understand that. If you look at it used to be that big business would hire credible spokespeople, right? 9 out of 10 doctors say you should smoke Marlboros or whatever it is, right? It's all bullshit, excuse my language, but it was all fabricated. And the social media world now is dominated by influencers, right? But it's not dominated by individuals like us. It should be, and I'll tell you why. Because right now there's an inverse relationship. If you look at the social media pyramid, it's flipped upside down. So the people who have the least scope, right? The people like us, people who are local, and it goes up like that. And the people at the top are the celebrities, right? So the people at the celebrities have the greatest reach in terms of reaching out to people, right? They have the biggest soapbox, but they have the least influence because no one trusts them. Am I going to trust Justin Bieber if he's going to tell me what car to buy? No, it doesn't work that way. But I am going to trust Will, or I'm going to trust my friend Jeff, or I'm going to trust Daniel. So the situation of the influencer is now being inverted, where instead of the triangle being like this, it's now flattened. And the flattened part of the triangle is all of us, right? So if you want to use social media, use it for advocacy about things that you're passionate about, the things that are important to you, the things that directly affect you and your family and are very local. Well, push the boundaries.
yeah. Well, and speaking of which, Jennifer, I'd love you to speak as a mother, as you already have, because there are those who are fearful of bringing children into the world. You have 4. And can you just speak about your vision, your vision, relative to coming generations, how you feel about that?
Did you give me 5 more hours? Or it's funny because I'm the kind of person who, I should say, recently a study was done to look at what kind of individual impacts actually have the biggest impact, individual actions have the biggest impact. And the first, I wish I had it at my fingertips, but the first one was telling everyone have 1 or fewer children. So the first idea to fix global climate change in terms of your own individual, what you can control. And of course you don't, and of course the social media went crazy because you can't tell people have 0 children and that's how we'll fix the world, because many of us have more, right? So, but I'm the kind of mom who goes around and shuts off all the lights and, kind of tries to get my kids to be more aware and more, and, there are things like the city of Ashland is actually doing quite a bit to have a climate change action plan. And I just went to a briefing about that, and one of the things they said, for example, is don't ever idle your engine. Just turn it off. If your car's gonna be on for more than 10 seconds, turn it off. But every single progressive, climate-oriented, yes parent at every single school in this entire town idles their engine for 10 minutes, and our kids are inhaling that waste. One of the single most polluting things you do is you drive a car, right? So And then I feel like I'm trying, as a parent, what we can do is raise really responsible citizens who can be the next generation, who can be the hope for the future, right? But then my daughter calls me from college and she says, oh my God, Mom, you should see what happens here. Like, you thought I was bad. I am the most responsible person compared to, and what happens at the end of the year at these elite schools is that kids literally throw everything in the trash. You've seen this. It's unbelievable, including bottles of money. They will take a bottle of money and they'll just put, I cannot even tell you, they'll put brand new clothes, they'll put unopened things, and it all ends up going into the landfill. So I really do think our kids they're going to bear the brunt of it, as Greta is always mentioning, but they also have to be empowered and activated and understand, and you see it the most. I mean, I lived in Niger in West Africa, where you would see a family with 9 children use fewer resources in a year than our children in this country would use in a week. And we learned to take showers in a bucket of water. You had one small bucket of water and you could take the most glorious shower you've ever had in that bucket of water. And I believe that we have to fix things on the policy level and at the big picture, but I also think that individual actions absolutely matter. And the more we can turn Ashland and everywhere else into a safe green space, the quicker we're going to start reversing things. And just one more thing, which is that we have to also look at the bigger picture, which is that we're this tiny little blip. I mean, humans have been around. If you look at the evolution of life on Earth, our species is just so small. And what we really need to do is we need to learn from the bacteria, because the bacteria are smarter than we are. They've been around much longer than we have, and they will survive after we do. And what happened with the cyanobacteria is they started to pollute themselves out of existence. They could not synthesize their waste product, which was oxygen, and most of them went extinct. It's possible that humans will not be in the huge billions that we are, of numbers that we are now. I don't think that we're going to lose humans completely, but I think that we have to take our lessons from the bacteria and make the changes we need to change right now.
Thank you. Well, just remind everyone that this is all being videotaped, so it'll be easy to pause, rewind, review, take notes, etc. And we just got about 10 minutes left, so I didn't want anyone to feel panicked. And also we can gather at the Luna Cafe for more questions. But it's time, I think, for each of you to give kind of a closing comment. This is a solutions panel, and maybe Laurie, starting with you, because yours is such a central part of this entire day, dealing with the sociopathic, psychopathic, narcissistic personality, solution-wise, leaving from today inspired, informed. What can you give us that will help us know what to do faced with this situation? And then maybe we just go down the line and each of you take about 2 minutes just to give some closing comment. Thank you.
Yeah, I think at the heart of what I presented, if I could say one thing from that, is that when we cultivate ourselves, when we are able to be more present in our bodies, more grounded, more here, then we have access to affecting all of these problems. Most of this has gone awry because we've been absent. We've not had either the information or the desire and fortitude, really, to face what's there, to face evil. The history you gave was so phenomenal. I know a lot of that you added pieces to it, to understand how these these personality types, disorders, have been functional, have been focused, have had an agenda that they have succeeded in by keeping us asleep. And it is paramount. It's what I work with my clients, it's what I speak to, is we have to take responsibility for our own presence, for our own knowledge. We can't sit down in front of the TV at night and we had a hard day and just be a passive recipient of the propaganda. We have to question, we have to hold ourselves accountable in this. And that is where we can discern who is doing this, who is acting in. We can dig in, go to the Romero Institute, go to various sources. There are books, that's just a smattering that I have back there. There's a lot of information if we'll dig for it and take that in and piece it together and then act on that, speak about it, offer it. When we see those behaviors, name them. One of the things that we're taught to do is to go silent, go polite, and not name it. When we name it, then we set up an environment for the people around us to also name it. That silence is what teaches us without words from childhood to not say it, not acknowledge it. Oh, don't say that. We have to counter that. We have to be real in ourselves. It means love these bodies, touch each other. Be real and be human. That's where our power starts, and then we can branch out into all these places and have an effect. Monitor our own behavior, food wastage, parenting, all of these avenues we have to heal this and express it.
Thank you. Thank you, Laurie. Mark?
Wow, that was hard to follow.
Yeah, lean right into your head, too.
I mean, I got everything Laurie said, but it was like kind of daunting. So, you know, Laurie's given us really concrete tools today. Daniel has given us this container of history as a baseline of knowledge to really understand what we have. Jennifer has talked a lot about health. Media is a tool, right? And it's a tool that's been used very effectively for propaganda by very, very discrete groups of people who basically want to control your mind and your heart and, frankly, your soul. So the only way to change that is to use media as a tool for yourself. It's a tool for empowerment, it's a tool for education, it's a tool for your own education, and it's a tool for getting your own truth and your own knowledge out. And so I think the most important thing from all of this, if I were to step back and really look at it, is to say, pick one or two things that affect you personally, that you're really passionate about. Don't worry about if you have any background knowledge in it. You can learn that. There is no shortage of opportunity to learn about anything that you want to learn. I mean, the net is full of it. There's no need to go to university to get a degree. But use the tools that are at our disposal in a way that work for you. Don't go on Facebook and be there for 2 hours just sort of schmoozing and seeing what everybody else is doing. Use it as a tool to make a decision as to what you want to do and how you want to get a certain information out. Just for example, the woman who was talking about net neutrality. If that's an issue that she's completely passionate about, create a focus group on that. Create a group of people that you can galvanize around, and then take that information and that knowledge and put it out on the web, right? Push the boundaries of it. Those things serve us. We're not here to serve them. They don't get to harvest our information and our data and our personal information and use it for their financial benefit. Use it for yourself. Turn the table around. And if they kick you off, great. Push again, right? No, because the only reason that they're able to do it, if you don't push, is because they don't get any resistance, right? This is physics, right? This is physics. This is about resistance and about the broad base of people who have power and have the ability and don't feel that they have power. They feel disempowered. Yeah. So the moment you take that power back and you start pushing, believe me, things will change.
Super.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark.
What do you mean? That's hard to follow.
You're getting a little message there.
We're good.
We're good.
Yeah.
Do any of you know who Julia Cameron is? She wrote a book called The Artist's Way, and one of the things that she says it's a method for kind of tapping into your own creativity. And one of the things that she said, she has so many different ideas, and it's kind of like this conference. You read a chapter and you get full of ideas. And she says, how do you figure out which ones to go to? She said, you know, whatever a task resonates the most with you, do that. And then whatever task you feel brings up the most resistance. That place of resistance is very powerful and very evocative, and I think that we learn a lot from what we don't understand and what we resist. So I look at everyone in this room and on this panel, and I think this is it. We have the solutions. They're right here. I just want to know all of you and be in community with you and figure out ways to change things. And then any place where you're resisting the ideas that you've heard today, if you can kind of move into that resistance, I think we're going to find the solutions together.
Thank you, Jennifer. Danny?
Yeah, mine's easy. I think that when all is said and done, the most important single issue to focus on is the global climate change. I think that's clear. And as I said, I would recommend that you go to the Romero Institute and find out everything you can about the Green Power Project and the Green New Deal, and act locally. Act locally here to push all of your representatives to do everything they can. And there's great support from above and the governor and everything here. But secondly, no matter, we can have everybody in the state of California vote, for example, and we aren't going to get any more electoral votes. You know, we're going to get 54, period. And because the popular vote doesn't win in the country. And so, you know, Oregon is going to vote in support of candidates that want to stop global climate change. California is going to vote. So what you should do, and this sounds difficult, what you should do is find your closest friends and relatives in some of the key states. And you can find out which ones those are. You know, the Colorado and Arizona, and in Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and Florida. There are a number of them. Contact them, communicate with them, and do whatever it is that you can do to get them active, or go there and become active in getting young people registered to vote. And to vote not just on a national level, but on a local level in their area, to get people into political office and public office to deal with global climate change. You know, it just has to be, it has to spread like mad. And as I say, that Oregon and California, we know how we're going to end up voting. We're going to have pretty good representatives, but we've got to get this out into the rest of the country. We have to think in terms of our being citizens of the country, and in fact citizens of the planet. You know, and not be so parochial, and just, it's important to act locally, but it's also important to project your influence and knowledge and enthusiasm and passion out into key areas where it makes a real difference in the country. You know, so really check and see who you know in Colorado, see who you know in Arizona, see who you know in Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, and talk with them. And see if you can see what you can do to get them mobilized, to get young people to vote. Young people, it's their future. You know, I mean, we're all going to be around for another 25 years or so. You know, but these kids are going to be around for another 80 years. I mean, they have no idea about what's coming. Have no idea what's coming. And I'll just say in closing, people understand that if the Antarctic shelf continues melting at the level that it is right now, what they're talking about is not only the ice fields melting, but the land glaciers melting. And if that happens, they're talking about, within our lifetimes, a 240-foot rise. Not a 3-meter rise, not a 4-meter, 240-foot rise in the mean sea level around the planet. You've got to understand what that implies. And there are 400 private nuclear power plants within a mile of the coastlines around the world. And so you're looking at
two-thirds of the global population live within 50
within,
miles of the coastline.
that's right. And there are going to be mass migration. There'll be wars over the water. You know, 2/3 of all of the fresh water on the planet is getting ready to be pumped into the sea or contaminated. You know, I mean, this is even those that think it's kind of cool to talk about global climate change right now are dramatically soft pedaling what's getting ready to happen. And even the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the last report that just came out with, is that they have all been wrong. in the direction of thinking it's going to happen slower than it is. And they're constantly surprised at how fast it's happening because it's all interacting with each other. There's this synergistic thing happening. And if in fact the permafrost areas on the planet thaw out, they're going to be spewing billions of tons of methane into the atmosphere. And that's what caused the last great extinction. So that we're on the brink of our human family being potentially eliminated from the planet. And remember, not every species is destined to survive. And we may be one of them if we aren't willing to act. If we can't, each one of us, like I've just said, if you aren't really willing to call your friends in the states that I've indicated, say, oh, that was a great idea. What did he say? You know, if you aren't even willing to do that, you know, then just coming to a gathering like this and all enjoying ourselves for an afternoon, 20 years from now, you know, when your grandchild asks you, what did you do? You say, I went to a conference and we talked about it. You know, you got to do something right now. I mean, immediately right now to save your grandchildren.
Thank you, Danny. We're going to need to stop because they'll hook us out of this room, but clearly, this is not a movie that ends at 1:45. We are not spectators.
Right.
And in the urgency of the world, what have we got? We've got each other, right? We've got each other. And I want to thank all of you so much for being here today and also for what you'll do tomorrow. And to our panelists, thank you. You're heroes. And we admire you, your lives, what you're doing. And we know that the best thanks we can give you is to do it with you, to join you. So thank you, everyone. There's audience surveys. We'd really like you.